Let's start the second day of our conference. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome you all here in Alfred Tarski's room, Philosophy of Warsaw, and those who are connected with us online to the second day of our symposium, History of the Lvov-Warsaw School. And our third session is about logic and its history again. And our first speaker is Professor Roman MURAWSKI from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, and his talk is entitled Lvov-Warsaw School and the University in Poznań.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the invitation and for the possibility to present the paper here. So we can start, yeah? Fine.
Yes, we can start.
Okay. So, Lvov-Warsaw School in Philosophy, as the very name suggests, was connected mainly with two academic centers, universities in Lvov and Warsaw. However, its influence was much wider. Scholars being members of this school were active also in other universities, in particular in Krakow, Vilnius, and Poznan. And the aim of my paper is to present and analyze connections of Lvov-Warsaw School with the university just in Poznan. Let us start with some introductory remarks, namely some remarks about the university, the very university in Poznan. The university was established after the First World War in 1919. The first inauguration took part on 7th May 1919. However, the academic tradition was present here already in the 16th century. In 1519, a Roman Catholic bishop, Jan Lubrański, founded the academy, which back then boasted the status of the higher learning institution. Shortly after, another institution of higher learning was established in Poznań, namely Jesuit College, and it continued the academic traditions of its predecessors. The first rector of the Jesuit College, Jakub Wujek, was the first scholar to translate the Bible into Polish. On October 28, 1611, King Sigismund III Waza granted the Jesuit College the status of the first university-type school in Poznań. The privilege was confirmed by King John III Sobieski, but only 308 years after the formal decision of the king, namely in 1919, the university began its real activity. And second introductory remark, namely, the name of the university was changing in the history. In the beginning, its name was Piast University, Wszechnica Piastowska. In 1920, it was renamed to University of Poznań, Uniwersytet Poznański. During the Second World War, staff and students of the university, expelled by the Nazis, founded an underground Polish University of the Western Lands, Uniwersytet Ziem Zachodnich. It operated primarily in Warsaw from 1940 to 1944 and in some other cities. In 1945, the university was reopened. In 1955, the University of Poznań adopted a new patron, namely the 19th century Polish Romantic poet Adam Mickiewicz, and changed its name to Adam Mickiewicz University, Uniwersytet imienia Adama Mickiewicza. In my paper, I will abstract from such details and simply say University in Poznań. So let us start the proper part. As the first contact of the university in Poznań with the Lvov-Warsaw School, one can plead the appointment of Zygmunt Zawirski to the chair of Theory and Methodology of Sciences at the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences. This chair was established after the retirement in 1928 by Władysław Mieczysław Kozłowski. Well, Kozłowski was, since 1920, the head of the chair of Theory and Methodology of Sciences at the philosophical faculty. It was, in fact, the first chair of logic at the university in Poznań. After the division of the philosophy faculty into the faculty of humanities and the faculty of mathematics and natural sciences in 1921, the chair was transformed into the chair of theory and methodology of natural sciences and humanities and incorporated into the faculty of humanities. After Kozłowski's retirement in 1928, his chair was cancelled. In the academic year 1929-1930, chair of theory and methodology of sciences was established at the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, and Zawirski became head of this chair. He came to Poland, to Poznań from Lvov, where he lectured at Polytechnic. And some words about Zawirski maybe. Well, Zawirski studied mathematics, physics and philosophy at the universities in Lvov, Berlin and Paris. He completed his doctorate under Kazimierz Twardowski in 1910. Then he taught mathematics and propedeutics to philosophy in various Lvov gymnasiums. He was habilitated in 1924 at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow on the basis of the thesis on the axiomatic method in natural sciences. Between 1924 and 28, he lectured on philosophy at the Faculty of General Studies of the Lvov Polytechnic. Zawirski dealt mainly with the methodology of sciences, as well as the theory of cognition and ontology, especially with problems related to the development of physics. There were two important theories, namely relativity theory and quantum theory. He was then the most outstanding Polish specialist in problems concerning the borderline between physics and philosophy. However, he was also interested in mathematical logic, especially in applications of mathematical logic, and Poznań period belongs to the most creative in his scientific career. In the philosophy of science, Zawirski was engaged in polemics with neo-Kantianism and empirical-criticism, the philosophical trends prevailing at that time. He also referred to the ideas of Vienna cycle, as most scholars of Lvov-Warsaw School did. An important place in his researches was occupied by the question of time. And here one should mention his monograph, L'évolution de la notion du temps, 1936. This monograph is regarded as his opus magnum. Zawirski opted for moderate realism. He appreciated the role and significance of both induction and deduction in natural sciences. He was also interested in problems of axiomatization of fragments of physics. What concerns logic, one should at least mention two problems in which Zawirski was interested, namely the problem of relations between logic and mathematics, and the meaning of non-classical logic, especially many-valued logics and intuitionistic logic. The problem of relations between logic and mathematics was considered by Zawirski, first of all, in the paper Stosunek logiki do matematyki w świetle badań współczesnych, the relation between logic and mathematics from the point of view of contemporary investigations. He described there as a development of logic, stressing the importance of Stoics logic, and he concentrates on Whitehead's and Russell's work, Principia Mathematica. He comes to the conclusion that it is of no greater importance whether the judgments of logic and mathematics are regarded as analytic or synthetic. Important is the problem of the consistency and independence of axioms. Mathematics and logic influence our cognition of the world. Since mathematical theories can be interpreted, mathematical constructions become elements of physical theories. This stresses the role and significance of mathematics and its methods for natural sciences. Therefore, Zawirski dedicated much attention to the problem of axiomatizability of such theories. Logic itself was understood by Zawirski in a broad sense, not only as a formal system or collection of such systems, but he included also here for example, the theory of reasoning. This was in fact a reflection of contemporary tendencies in Poland, and not only there. He wrote in the book Logika Teoretyczna, Theoretical Logic, that, quote, logic is a general science and it indicates a structure common to all disciplines, ways in which in particular domains their statements are justified. And he wrote also that logic is not, quote, a science about reason, but rather about forms of reasoning used by us in any deduction as well as reasoning. Zawilski was interested, as I said before a moment, in non-classical logic. He treated many varied logics as a way to describe and to understand the phenomena of the micro world. Combining ideas of Jan Łukasiewicz and Emil Post, Zawilski attempted to construct a system of logic which would enable us to interpret problems of contemporary physics as well as the probability calculus. Zawilski can be treated, in fact, as a precursor of the so-called quantum logic. Zawilski stayed in Poznań till 1937, when he left the university in Poznań and moved to Krakow to Jagiellonian University. Investigations on the borderline between philosophy and physics were continued in Poznań by his student Franciszek Zeidler. Zawilski had also another student in Poznań, who should be mentioned here, namely Zbigniew Jordan. He is treated as belonging to the second generation of Lvov-Warsaw School. Jordan studied philosophy at the University in Poznań. His master thesis was devoted to the critical analysis of psychological propositions in the philosophy of Tadeusz Kotarbiński. Under the influence of Zawilski, Jordan got interested in axiomatic method in philosophy. In 1936, he was rewarded PhD under the supervision of Zawilski. His doctoral thesis was a book o matematycznych podstawach systemu Platona, Mathematical Foundations of Plato's System, published a year later in 1937. Jordan claimed there that Plato was the discoverer of the axiomatic method in mathematics. After doctorate, Jordan continued his studies at universities in Bonn and Paris and prepared the Habitationsschrift. It was devoted to the problem of the infinity. Unfortunately, the outbreak of the Second World War prevented the habilitation. The manuscript went missing, unfortunately. After the war, Jordan worked in England and Canada, and his works were devoted to the history of logic and philosophy. After Zawilski left Poznań, there appeared a vacancy at his chair of theory and methodology of sciences. And he again enters, in a certain sense, the Lvov-Warsaw School. Unfortunately, the history is not quite clear, since no documents that could explain the issue have been found. Maybe there were no document at all. So we must rely on opinions coming from secondhand. Anita Burman-Pfefferman and Solomon Pfefferman, in their biography of Tarski, entitled Alfred Tarski, Life and Logic, published in 2004, wrote the following words. I quote, "The Ministry of Education asked all the relevant professors in Poland to suggest a candidate to fill the vacancy, and Tarski was unanimously recommended. However, Poznań, always a stronghold of right-wing conservatives and dominated by the Catholic Church, had, since Piłsudski's death in 1935, moved even farther to the right and become outright fascistic and anti-Semitic. Unanimous recommendations notwithstanding, Poznań University did not appoint Tarski, And since there would have been no way to appoint anyone else without making the reasons for denying him the professorship patently clear, the position was eliminated. So far, Anita Burman-Pfefferman and Solomon Pfefferman. And in fact, the position left by Zawirski was not filled in the period 1937-1939. Professor Woleński explained this in the following way, according to quotation. According to Hirsch, the people in Poznań were afraid that Tarski would apply and win the competition. Poznań was perhaps the most anti-Semitic region in Poland. This would explain the situation, unquote. In fact, the position of a chair of theory and methodology of sciences, due to the outbreak of the Second World War, remained in fact unfilled until 1945. One can only imagine what would be the history of logic in Poland if Tarski were appointed at the university in Poznań in 1937. Well, the spirit of Lvov-Warsaw School came again to Poznań after the war, when Kazimierz Ajdukiewicz rejected the offers from universities in Warsaw and Krakow and decided to take the position just in Poznań. Why? It's unknown. He became the head of the chair of theory and methodology of sciences at the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences. Some words about Ajdukiewicz. He studied philosophy, physics, and mathematics at Jan Kazimierz University in Lvov. In 1912, he obtained his doctor's degree under the supervision of Kazimierz Twardowski. In the years 1913-14, he continued his studies at the University of Göttingen, where he listened to lectures given by Edmund Husserl, Leonard Nelson, and David Hilbert. And views of the latter, namely of David Hilbert, exerted a considerable influence on Ajdukiewicz, which was revealed, for example, in his Habitationsschrift. In the years 1919-22, he worked as a teacher in a gymnasium in Lvov, and at the same time he conducted researches. In 1921, he completed his habilitation at the Philosophical Faculty of the University of Warsaw. In years 1922-25, he lectured as a private docent at the University of Lvov and taught in secondary schools in Lvov. 1925, he became professor of the University of Warsaw, and from 1928, he was professor of the University of Lvov. In the period 1940-41, he lectured on psychology at the Lvov State Medical Institute. During the Nazi occupation, he worked as an accountant, and at the same time, he was involved in the undergraduate education. In 1944-45, he held the chair of physics at the Ivan Franko University in Lvov. And in 1945, he was given the chair of theory and methodology of sciences at the University of Poznań. This chair was transformed in 1951 to the chair of logic at the newly founded Faculty of Mathematics, Physics, and Chemistry. Ajdukiewicz was also elected rector of the university in Poznań in a difficult period of time, namely between years 1948 and 52. He was rector. He was called then Kazimierz Wspaniały, Casimir Magnificent. And in 1955, he moved to the University of Warsaw. Well, Ajdukiewicz belongs to the outstanding representatives of Lvov-Warsaw School. He had a significant influence on the development of logic and philosophy, not only in Poland. When he came to Poznań, he was already widely known in the world. The fame brought him his works from the interwar period. He dealt mainly with semiotics, epistemology, logic, and general methodology of sciences. In what follows, I will indicate some main achievements of Ajdukiewicz. To main achievements of him belongs the conception of meaning. It formed the logical base of his radical conventionalism proclaimed by him in his early works. Later, he moved towards empiricism, stressing the role of experience and measurement in science. In formal logic, which he treated as a tool of philosophy, making possible a precise and strict considerations. So in formal logic, he proposed the definition of a consequence, which in a certain sense prepared the way to Tarski's definition. Ajdukiewicz formulated the deduction theorem, as well as considered the role of infinite induction. To his important achievements belong also the calculus of syntactic types. In methodology, he was interested in problems connected with practical logic, such as classification of reasoning, of the problem of rationality of inferences. He proposed a new definition and classification of reasoning, and in works published in his Poznań period, he criticized severely and explicitly various idealistic tendencies in philosophy. This critique was always based on logical analysis of discussed conceptions and aimed at indication of logical mistakes and errors. He also took discussions with Marxist philosophy, which was prevailing at that time in Poland, and with Marxist philosophers. And what is interesting, he not only defended his own philosophical views against attacks of opponents, but also sometimes seemed to advance the latter some solutions in favor of their ideas. Ajdukiewicz, following the ideas of his master Twardowski, paid great attention to the problem of teaching logic. He wrote some excellent textbooks of logic and philosophy, took part in discussions concerning the didactics of logic. One can mention only his famous book Zagadnienia I kierunki filozofii, Problems and Trends in the Philosophy, published for the first time in 1949. There were so far 3 editions of this book, and his Zarys Logiki, The Outline of Logic, 1957. He organized also meetings devoted to teaching of logic and philosophy. During 10 years, when he stayed in Poznań, between 1945 and 55, when he was the head of the chair, he created here in Poznań a significant scientific center in logic and philosophy. In methodological seminars directed by him took part many scholars from various Polish universities. Numerous papers in logic, methodology, and philosophy were written here, papers representing the highest scientific level. Ajdukiewicz really instilled in Poznań the spirit of Lvov-Warsaw School. It should be added also that at that time, Poznań was active also in publishing scientific journals. Here in 1953 was founded the journal Studia Logica. Its editor-in-chief was just Ajdukiewicz, and Roman Suszko was the first secretary of the editorial board. The journal appears till today and belongs to leading journals in the world, journals in logic, devoted to logic. Also in Poznań was published the journal Studia Filozofica, co-edited in the period 1935-51 by Ajdukiewicz, together with Roman Ingarden and Kazimierz Twardowski. Well, so far Ajdukiewicz. Among his collaborators and students during his Poznań period were 4 persons at least, namely Seweryna Łuszczewska-Romanowa, Roman Suszko, Zbigniew Czerwiński, and Andrzej Malewski. They continued Ajdukiewicz work in a sense when he left Poznań and went to Warsaw. Roman Suszko. He studied physics, mathematics, and chemistry at the university in Poznań, and during the war at underground schools in Krakow. In 1945, he obtained master's degree in philosophy at the Jagiellonian University under the supervision of Zawirski. And a year later, in 1946, he started the work in the chair of Theory and Methodology of Sciences at the University in Poznań, just in Ajdukiewicz chair. Here he obtained in 1948 the doctor's degree under the supervision of Ajdukiewicz, and in 1951 the habilitation. He was also, as mentioned before the moment, the secretary of the editorial board of Studia Logica. In 1952, he left Poznań and moved to Warsaw to the chair of logic at the Philosophical Faculty of the University of Warsaw. His papers, written during the Poznań period, were devoted to logical rules of reasoning and their relations with laws of logic, theory of mathematical definitions, as well as to some problems connected with the theory of axiomatic systems. In particular, he considered systems of logic without axioms, but with appropriate finitistic inference rules. His Habitationsschrift, Canonic Axiomatic Systems, 1951, was devoted to the explication of Skolem paradox and contained general meta-theoretical considerations concerning models of axiomatic theories. During his work in Poznań, Suszko published also a few other minor papers, in particular a critical discussion of logical positivism, and began his work of diachronic logic. Zbigniew Czerwiński, another student and collaborator of Ajdukiewicz, in his logical works, he was concentrated with the theory of induction and its connections with statistics and game theory. He moved later to problems of econometrics. Andrzej Malewski was an assistant of Ajdukiewicz chair. In 1956, he moved to the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology of Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw. Later, he collaborated with Professor Jerzy Topolski, who was a historian from Poznań. They collaborated in the domain of the methodology of history, as about Poznań School of the Methodology of Historical Sciences. He wrote also an interesting and affordable textbook in logic, ABC Porządnego Myślenia, ABC of Proper Thinking, 1957. When after Ajdukiewicz left Poznań and moved to Warsaw, the head of the chair of logic became Seweryna Łuszczewska-Romanowa. So she was a successor of Ajdukiewicz. In 1970, the chair was renamed as Department of Mathematical Logic and incorporated into the newly founded Institute of Mathematics. Who was Seweryna Łuszczewska-Romanowa? He studied philosophy and mathematics at the University in Lvov. In 1932, he obtained a doctor's degree. The real supervision was in fact Ajdukiewicz. However, for formal reasons, the official supervisor was Kazimierz Twardowski. Next, she started the work at Chair of Faculty of Philosophy I of the University in Lvov, whose head was Ajdukiewicz. In 1943, he was arrested by Gestapo and sent to concentration camps in Majdanek, Ravensbrück, and Buchenwald. In December 1946, after the war, she came to Poznań, and a year later, in 1947, she started the work at the chair of Theory and Methodology of Sciences of the University in Poznań, directed by Ajdukiewicz. In 1955, she became his successor as the head of the chair. She directed the chair till her retirement in 1947. Her successor was Tadeusz Batu. Well, what about her scientific work? She worked mainly in mathematical logic, methodology, and history of logic. Due to her dramatic experiences during the war, she published relatively few papers. However, one can recognize in her works the influence of her studies in Lvov under Twardowski, Mickiewicz, and Roman Ingarden in philosophy, as well as his studies of mathematics with Hugo Steinhaus and Stefan Banach. This can be seen in particular in the synthesis of analytical philosophy and logic. This was characteristic for her style of writing. Among her works, one should mention Wieloznaczność a język nauki, Polysemy and the Language of Science. This paper was devoted to the ambiguity of concepts used in the language of science. One should mention here also his work, which brought the generalization of graphic method of Venn diagrams. It was a paper, Analiza i ogólnienie metody sprawdzania formuł logicznych przy pomocy diagramu Venna. In this paper, she proposed a method of checking the decidability of the first-order monadic predicate calculus. As you all know, predicate calculus is undecidable, but the first-order monadic predicate calculus is decidable, and Łukasiewicz-Romanowa proposed a method of checking the decidability. She wrote also papers on the problem of induction, on multi-level classifications, on the distance function, and on generalized classifications of infinite types. Her successor was, as I mentioned here, Tadeusz Batuk. Some words about him. He obtained his PhD under supervision of Łukasiewicz-Romanowa. His scientific work was devoted mainly to applications of logic to phonology and philosophical analysis, as well as philosophy of mathematics. His main work, very famous, translated and discussed, was the monograph published in London in 1967, Axiomatic Method in Phonology. In this paper, he proposed an axiomatic system for phonology. The system used Leśniewski's theories. Under his direction, direction of Batuk, the department was strongly developed. Some young mathematicians interested in logic appeared there, and the scope of scientific researches was, in fact, extended. Well, considering connections between University in Poznań and the Lvov-Warsaw School, one should mention still one issue. However, it has another character as those mentioned above. I mean here the fact that the University in Poznań awarded in 1930 honorary doctorate to Kazimierz Twardowski. This was formally done by Senate of University of Poznań in May 1930 on the request of the Council of the Faculty of Humanities. Unfortunately, due to poor health of Twardowski, he was unable to take part in the ceremony in Poznań. Therefore, the ceremony, in which participated the delegation of the University in Poznań, took part 2 years later, on 21st November 1932, in the hall of Jan Kazimierz University in Lwów. The Poznań delegation consisted of professors Jan Sajdak, vice rector, Ludwik Jak-Sabykowski, dean of the Faculty of Humanities, and Stefan Błachowski, who was a supervisor. In the ceremony took part the rector of Lwów University, Adam Gerstmann, the whole Senate, representatives of secular and spiritual authorities, as well as numerous students. Twardowski gave then his famous speech o dostojeństwie uniwersytetu, the majesty of the university. He wrote this text in 1931 and complemented it in September 1932. He called this text in his dzienniki, diaries, quote, "My testament on the essence of university." The text was published by the University in Poznań in 1933 with a circulation of 500 copies, 100 copies of them on a special handmade paper. Twardowski's photograph, characterization of introductory speeches and copy of the diploma given to him were added. We have here the title pages of this text. Well, the text was reprinted in 211 in the framework of the celebration of the 400 years of university tradition in Poznań, and in 2007 there was prepared a bibliophile edition of Twardowski's speech, Polish and English text in 200 copies. They were not for sale, they were used only for promotion of the university. Well, the time is almost over, so it's time for conclusion. The above considerations show that there were real and significant connections between Lvov-Warsaw School and the university in Poznań. Those connections can be seen both in the presence of scholars who were students of Twardowski and in this way members of the school, as well as in the directions and tendencies of investigations they have undertaken and the methods they promoted. It can be easily seen that that investigations of scholars being active at the university in Poznań, described above, the ideas of the Lvov-Warsaw School were realized. They devoted much attention to methods used in considerations of particular philosophical problems. They used in those considerations precise methods, took care of the precisation of concepts, applied logical analysis in discussions of classical problems in philosophy mainly. Instead of formulating general systems, they concentrated on particular problems. This was all in the spirit of Lvov-Warsaw School. They stressed the role and significance of logic for methodology and philosophy. They attempted to construct reliable foundations of various disciplines, for example, physics, by using axiomatic method. They contributed also to the development of logic itself, both general and mathematical logic. One remark should be added here, namely, Twardowski, as you all know, wanted to build modern philosophy in Poland, and therefore he postulated that Polish scholars should write modern academic textbooks in Polish. And his students active in Poznań followed this postulate. One can mention here, for example, Mickiewicz and his excellent textbooks, or textbooks by Zawirski and Malewski. Well, Sotarski was not given the position at the university in Poznań. This would certainly change the situation of logic and philosophy in Poland generally, and in Poznań in particular. So nevertheless, the spirit of Lvov-Warsaw School was present here in Poznań and influenced the development of scientific investigations carried out here. And the influence of this spirit should not be limited to scholars mentioned in the paper and treated as the first or second generation of Lvov-Warsaw School, but it can be seen also in the research of their successors till today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think we have still time for one question or comment. Professor Boleński.
Small corrections. First, Twardowski didn't edit together with Mickiewicz and Ingarden Studia Filozofica until 1951 because he died in 38.
No, yeah, right. It was a mistake. I mentioned that they started to edit yeah, right.
Second is that Łuszewska Romowa couldn't study with Ingarden because Ingarden became privat docent and started his lectures after she graduated. Because she graduated, I think, in 2024, 2025, but Ingarden began in 1926, I guess. So there was no connection.
Mm-hmm.
question. Eventually, she could attend his monographic lectures, but I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and perhaps I give voice to myself because just really short question. Maybe you said that Zawirski had great opportunities to scientific work in Poznań, and also Mickiewicz after the war chose Poznań, and he had many opportunities there. He was a rector of this university and so on. So what do you think? Finally moved
Sorry. There are problems with sound, with the voice. There are some interruptions. I cannot understand your question. Could you repeat, please?
Okay. What do you think? Why both Zawirski and Mickiewicz finally left Warsaw, left Poznań? For Krakow and Mickiewicz to Warsaw.
I don't know. It's difficult to say. You know, only they knew why that the left. Maybe they felt that the change would be something fine for their research. The change of well.
Environment, yeah. Okay, thank you once again. Thank you for your talk and for the discussion. And now we've got about 18 minutes break for coffee, and we will be back at 11:40.
Thanks.
Hello, Roman. I have some private, so to speak, question for you.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So I tell it in Polish because it is only for you.
Fine.
Przede wszystkim cześć.
Cześć.
A poza tym mam 3 takie sprawy do ciebie.
Tak.
Czy ty może wiesz, kto był promotorem magisterium i doktoratu Giedymina w Poznaniu? Wigner czy Ajdukiewicz?
Nie wiem. To
Bo nigdzie tego się nie podaje. I tak samo wspomniałeś o Jordanie, o jego doktoracie, no to wiadomo, ale magisterium, że dotyczyło tam tego reizmu kotarbińskiego.
Tak.
Ale kto był promotorem? Jak się to nazywało?
Tego też nie wiem.
A Romku, ty jesteś w stanie tam sprawdzić, bo
mogę
masz
poszukać
jakieś kontakty. Te 2 sprawy, prawda? To
dobrze,
znaczy,
czy z tego magisterium...
Kto był promotorem, bo on miał i magisterium Giedymin i doktorat w Poznaniu. Wiem, że magisterium miał w 50 roku, a doktorat w 51. Wiem też, jaki był tytuł doktoratu, natomiast nie wiem ani tytułu, ani w obu wypadkach, czy Wigner był promotorem, czy Ajdukiewicz.
Znaczy, rozumiem, takie rzeczy powinny właściwie być w archiwum pewnie, prawda, w uniwersytetu.
No jak masz, myślę, że jako tam miejscowy profesor, to bez trudu oni ci udostępnią te informacje,
tak.
bo to teraz, wiesz, jest po prostu beznadziejnie z tymi normalnymi sposobami kontaktu.
Czy Jacku, z tego pytasz o to, kto był promotorem magisterium?
Giedymina, magisterium i doktoratu w 51 i kto był promotorem Magisterium Jordana, które było, nawiasem mówiąc, w 34, bo wiesz, że w 30 chyba pierwszym roku czy nawet w 29 wprowadzono tę dwustopniowość w Polsce.
Tak.
Przedtem był tylko doktorat, a potem zrobiono i magisterium. To jest pierwsza sprawa.
Dobrze.
Druga sprawa to jest, proszę ciebie, ja nie wiem, czy ty wiesz, że to jest pewien paradoks, moim zdaniem, mianowicie inicjatorem tego doktoratu honorowego u was Twardowskiego był Błachowski, a Błachowski nie był jego uczniem.
Nie był.
To jest ciekawe, prawda, że mimo to jednak on to do tego doprowadził. I to w ogóle, wiesz, naprawdę Błachowski się zachowywał bardzo dobrze w stosunku do jego osobiście i w ogóle Twardowski uważał go właściwie za rodzaj członka szkoły. Natomiast trzecia sprawa, Romku, to dotyczy tej nieszczęsnej plotki, którą puściła w świat pani Pfefferman i którą sobie wyssała z palca. Po pierwsze, nie było żadnej procedury wszczętej przez uniwersytet, tylko kilku logików, w tym Tarski, bo nie tylko Tarski, warszawskich, no, sądowało, czy może oni mogliby objąć tę katedrę. To jest pierwsza sprawa. A druga sprawa, zawracanie głowy, że tam chodziło o jakieś względy antysemickie. Na pewno słyszałeś o Tadeuszu Strumille. To był, no przed wojną to była figura, zresztą zamordowany bestialsko przez Niemców w Auschwitz. On był harcmistrzem, ale przede wszystkim był uczniem Twardowskiego. On napisał pracę z zakresu psychologii i w późnych latach 30. prowadził w Poznaniu wykłady z psychologii. I kiedy no, tam był ten wakat, został ten wakat po Zawirskim, to zlecono mu po prostu dodatkowo jako zastępcy profesora wykłady z logiki, bo on miał bardzo dobre wykształcenie logiczne, takie ogólne, nie matematyczne, tylko ogólne. I on w 37, 8 i 89 roku te wykłady jako zastępca, ale nie etatowy, tylko po prostu no, w zastępstwie, tak? Tak byśmy dzisiaj powiedzieli, jak to się teraz mówi, no zlecenie takie miał.
Właśnie, zajęcia zlecone.
Zajęcia zlecone. I tak i te zajęcia prowadził. I wiem, że też starał się uzyskać dla siebie katedrę. Nie logiki, takiej luźniejszej powiedzmy, to psychologii. I też nic z tego nie wyszło. Więc wiesz, a on był no, w kategoriach pani Pfefferman nacjonalistą, prawda? Bo należał, bo był harcmistrzem głównym Rzeczypospolitej, należał do tych organizacji raczej prawicowych, no i też nie dostał, więc to wiesz, diabła warta ta historia. I po prostu oni oboje postanowili pokazać, jacy to my jesteśmy antysemici i to wszystko. Ja zresztą o tym pisałem, wiesz, w tym takim tomie otarskim, bo nie wiem, czy pamiętasz, że wydałem taki tom Tarskiego, o tutaj go mam.
Tak.
No, bo byłem pierwszym do licha, który się tymi sprawami zajął i porządnie zrekonstruowałem i życiorys jego, i wszystkie zdarzenia, i starałem się jakoś tam przedstawić jego poglądy. No i tam jest też streszczenie obszerne po francusku, więc Pfeffermanowi powinni łaskawie do tego zajrzeć i nie zajrzeli, bo tamta sprawa jest wyjaśniona. No, to wszystko jest wyssane z palca. Także takie 3 rzeczy chciałem ci powiedzieć, ale przede wszystkim chciałem się ucieszyć, że cię widzę w zdrowiu.
Ja też się cieszę.
No, w naszym wieku, Romku, to niestety trzeba się z tego cieszyć, bo jak ja 1 listopada to coraz więcej na cmentarzu widzę swoich rówieśników.
Niestety tak jest, Jacku, jest, tak. Życie.
Także zachowajmy humor, nie dajmy się Putinowi.
Właśnie.
No wiesz, ten szaleniec może wszystko zrobić przecież.
Niestety tak.
A wiesz, to ci powiem jeszcze na zakończenie, jeżeli mogę, taką sprawę. Mianowicie kontaktowałem się w jakichś tam sprawach bibliograficznych z taką, wydawało mi się, przyzwoitą logiczką z Moskwy, o której wiedziałem, że ona powinna wiedzieć i rzeczywiście mi tam pomogła. Ja znam dość dobrze rosyjski, więc mi się z nią nawet korespondowało przyjemnie po rosyjsku. I jak Putin wywołał tę wojnę, no to dowiedziałem się, że proszę ciebie, chyba 500 rektorów uczelni rosyjskich,
Tak.
wyższych, i nawet czytałem to oświadczenie, poparło to wyższe
Było coś takiego, było.
całkowicie.
Tak.
Całkowicie. I to wiesz, od Nowosybirska po Moskwę i Petersburg.
Ciekawe, może ich zmusili po prostu do tego. Nie wiem, jak to.
Ale przepraszam cię bardzo, Romku. No jak można zmusić? No jak?
No wiesz, można zagrozić, nie wiem, wyrzuceniem
A
spraw
zagrozić to można, ale zmusić
kłopotami
to dwie różne rzeczy,
dla rodziny.
przepraszam.
No tak, no tak, tak, tak. Mhm.
No to do licha ciężkiego, wiesz, tutaj morduje się ludzi, a
No tak.
nie można zrezygnować, nie można swojej kariery tam administracyjnej
No
poświęcić.
więc właśnie.
Obrzydliwe.
Właśnie.
I wiesz, ja
Obrzydliwe,
do
tak,
niej
tak.
napisałem
Aha,
i powiedziałem jej, co ona o tym sądzi.
aha. I
Czy
co?
Rosji już nie wystarczy to wielkie terytorium i musi jeszcze
Właśnie, właśnie.
zajmować?
Mhm.
Cisza. Po prostu żadna reakcja. Odtąd się nasze kontakty urwały. Tacy są niestety, Romku, Rosjanie.
To jest bardzo smutne wszystko, że rzeczywiście
Smutne,
oni.
straszne.
Tak, tak, tak.
Nie? Bo wiesz, jak tam jacyś gdzieś zapici
Tak.
chłopi, prawda, czy jacyś tam partyjniacy i tak dalej byli, jacyś tam bohaterowie wojny tej wyzwoleńczej, no to jest jakoś zrozumiałe, ale wiesz, ludzie inteligentni,
Tak, 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 tak. No,
okropne.
to jest smutne niestety, prawda? I właściwie źle wróży na przyszłość, bo właściwie
Niestety tak,
tak, bo nie ma w sumie nikogo, kto by się mógł przeciwstawić, prawda?
tak jest.
To jest
tak.
smutne niestety. No.
To jest okropne. No ale trudno. Po prostu wszystko w rękach opatrzności.
Dokładnie, dokładnie.
Ważne, że się widzimy. I jak, Romku, to nie jest sprawa pilna, ale jak będziesz
Dobrze.
przy okazji mógł, to bardzo mi to ułatwi, bo ja
Dobrze.
mógłbym sam tam napisać, ale wiesz, oni
Nie, lepiej, no.
niechętnie.
Aha,
A miejscowy
dobrze.
i znany profesor to tam bez
Ach, spróbuję, Jacka, czegoś
Dobra.
nowego, to ci oczywiście dam znać, nie?
No, dziękuję ci bardzo za piękny
Dziękuję
przegląd tych perypetii poznańskich, bo to warto podkreślić, że w zasadzie stąd się wzięła w ogóle potem cała ta szkoła, prawda? Ta Ziembiński niby nie był
No
uczniem,
nie. Aha.
ale też kolaborował.
No tak,
Znałeś
oczywiście.
Ziembińskiego osobiście?
Tak.
No ja też, to wspaniały człowiek.
Tak.
Poczuciem humoru.
Tak.
Wiesz, kiedyś mi powiedział, ja tam jakoś się zgadało na temat różnic dzielnicowych i mówił, ja mówię do niego, panie profesorze, to w Poznaniu, no to wiadomo, dobra robota, stare tradycje. On do mnie mówi, panie Jacku, jakie tradycje w Poznaniu? Czy pan wie, jaki procent prawdziwych poznaniaków mieszka w Poznaniu? 10.
No właśnie.
No fajny
Tak
to
to
był
było.
człowiek. Dobra, to już cię zostawiam, odpocznij, dopij kawę.
Właśnie.
Kawę pijesz?
Herbatę piję teraz.
A ja coś takiego, widać to? Czy...
Aha.
No,
Fajnie się nazywa.
to są wspaniałe w ogóle rzeczy, kwasy, lepsze niż Coca-Cola, wiesz?
A widzisz, no. Fajnie.
No, to cześć.
Wszystkiego dobrego. Czołem, Jacku.
Dziękuję jeszcze raz.
Dziękuję również, cześć.
Okay, so hello, welcome after the break. Our next speaker is Adam TRYBUS from Jagiellonian University, and his talk is Łukasiewicz, Nachlass, a field report from Manchester.
Yes, thank you very much. So my talk will be a little bit different because the findings I want to share with you, be it philosophical, historical, or logical, are also physical findings, because what I will be talking about is the contents of Łukasiewicz archive stored in Manchester. And for the most part, I want to share the documents with you, and so my chapter to me now say basic words about the archive as an introduction, and then we'll move to have a look at the documents themselves. Okay, doesn't work. How to? Okay, everything. So Peter Simons wrote a great entry on Łukasiewicz in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and so I'm just focusing on the part where Łukasiewicz came to Ireland after the war. So in March 1946, he arrives in Dublin, and around autumn the same year, he is appointed a professor of mathematical logic at the Royal Irish Academy, RIA. However, bear in mind that at this point he was 68, I think. So no wonder that his health deteriorates over the years, even more so. He had several heart attacks, and by 1955, so he was 75, then he was no longer able to lecture at the Academy. And sadly, on the 13th of February, he was in hospital. So all his papers, also his papers and correspondence, were transferred to his wife Regina to the Royal Irish Academy. But the story doesn't end there, because Czesław Lejewski brings the archive to Manchester. I put a question mark there because I'm not quite sure what the story was, but I assume he was active in this pursuit of the papers. So let's say he brings them to Manchester, and obviously Lejewski was a former student of Łukasiewicz, and he also studied under Cardinal later on, and since then he had found a permanent placement at the University of Manchester. So Simons says that in 1963 the Academy finally transferred their holdings to the library at the University of Manchester, where they remain uncatalogued. And this is where my story begins, in a sense. But let's have a look at the fate of the archive. Only on the basis of some anecdotal evidence and private communication am I in position to say something about it. So I know that a number of people had access to the archive over the years, and obviously initially probably the access was full. Now it's quite limited, and the names to mention is Peter Simons, who told me that he only was able to have a look at a small fraction of what's in there, and Mickiewicz, a student that but to my knowledge, there is no systematic account of the contents of the archive. So finally, how did I look at the archives? So it's quite complicated these days because this is not a regular. It's not a regular library item to have a look at. So you have to have special permission to go there and have a look. So this is one of the first emails I wrote to the archives. So I introduced myself, and I was already there in Manchester doing completely unrelated research because I studied during my PhD, and I went there for consultations on a related topic, related to logic. But I also knew that there is archive, Łukasiewicz archive there, so I thought I will have a look, and it was a long-standing dream of mine to do so. So I introduced myself, and I'm saying I'm now in Manchester, and I would like to set up an appointment, if it's possible. So the answer was that I should. There's a curator that looks after the archives. So I should first contact him, and moreover, I found out that given the restrictions and checking required, we need at least 7 days notice for viewing of the material, which was bad news for me because I was only there for a couple of days, and I thought I would just go there the next day and have a look. And moreover, what was required was I need to get registered and complete a number of forms and so on. So it all seemed about it, and I'm trying to pull all the strings I can, saying that I'm the graduate of the university. I mentioned my supervisor, and then I go to my supervisor, Ian, who actually physically calls the people there, asking them to let me in. And finally, I got the permission of the curator to view the boxes, and so the special collections unit agrees to set up a meeting on the. I was emailing them on Wednesday, I think, so Friday was the meeting day, and but still some special forms of ID with my address, and I didn't have them, so I was quite stressful. But in the end, nobody checked this. I got some utility bills, and they said it's fine. So this is my story, and so after this introduction, let's have a look at the documents themselves. And I have to say, I will not present them in any chronological order. I'll try to comment on them as I see them, and I'm happy to receive your input. So we can begin.
We need a minute for reasons.
Tutaj się za dużo otwarty jest program do edytu o pokazywaniu. Tak. To jest to. I to będzie to mnóstwo, także ja to przewidzę. So I know that we can see this, but I'm hoping it's visible online as well. So this is how the boxes look like. There are about 19 of them, packed with papers, mostly letters. And I spent the entire day just looking through the papers. And I have to say, I think I've looked through all the papers. I took photos of some of them, and I remember a fraction of it. So it definitely requires some more viewing. So this is the box. Okay, let's see if I can. Oh, okay. So that's just some envelope, and I'll need to. Yeah. So it contains a lot of drafts and handwritten notes, and a lot of derivations, as you can see them there in the Polish notation, like pages upon pages of derivations of some sort, which was quite interesting. to find a way to, okay.
Are these notes in English or Polish?
They mix the different languages. Some of them, depending on the person that was communicating with Łukasiewicz, so he wrote something. He received a lot in English, Polish, German. I think that's the three main languages. Some French as well. So that's a draft of a letter penned by Łukasiewicz. Another derivation in Polish notation. And this is so this is a letter from Ivo Thomas, who was I think a friar, English friar, monk, who was interested in Łukasiewicz's work, and he did actually some work, and they corresponded extensively about Aristotle and modal logic, I think. So this is the reply given by Łukasiewicz. And now, so this is, I don't know if you can see this, that's, so somebody addresses him. It's not visible completely, I don't know why. So some people address him dear professor, and some of them call him dear rector, just to emphasize his position. And let's have a look. Okay, so there's some bits missing. So that was actually the person that was addressing Łukasiewicz as dear rector was Czesław Lejewski himself, and there is an extensive correspondence between Łukasiewicz and Lejewski. I took only a few photos of that. This is again Ivo Thomas. This is Gilbert Ryle writing to Łukasiewicz. That's some manuscripts. Okay, so I think, I don't remember exactly, but there was a photo of, it's, I think, from India, and I might be wrong, but I think Ivo Thomas was responsible for sending this to Łukasiewicz. And now we are at the letter from Wrocław, 1953, and the author of this letter is Słupecki. So he's mentioning, for example, Jerzy Łoś. My previous assistant professor, Jerzy Łoś, is a professor already. I'm quite lucky when it comes to assistants. Two of them are professors and quite good at that. This is not my achievement. However, I do take care of my younger colleagues. And so there is a mention of Studia Logica, which is about to be established, and it is quite a few mentions of Studia Logica, and he's saying that he will contribute, Słupecki will contribute something to it. And also there are some private matters. He's mentioning his daughter, that his daughter gives him the most joy and worries as well. And they say that she conquered them completely. So as a father of a daughter, I can relate to this as well. And what is, okay, so this is not showing. This is again a letter from Słupecki, sharing some technical details. And this is interesting, because if you have a look here, this is addressed to Łukasiewicz's wife, Regina. So there were two letter exchanges, sometimes crossing, one between Słupecki and Łukasiewicz, and the other one between Słupecki's wife and Łukasiewicz's wife. And so they talk mostly about private stuff. And when I say they crossed, it's sometimes there's a single letter. The top of it is penned by Słupecki's wife, and the bottom is penned by Słupecki himself. So it's quite interesting. Okay. Oh, I think that's actually the case. So she finished her letter, and now it's Słupecki's turn, and he's again mentioning Studia Logica that needs to be established. So this is a letter to Heinrich Scholz, I think, but it's not by, it's a mimeographed version. It's not by Łukasiewicz, but Beth, I think. So I don't know why it's in the archive. Okay, some of it is not didn't download properly. So is it me? No, I think it's just the. Yeah, exactly. That's why I took the photo, because it's this is a postcard. I think I can't remember now. I think from around 1940 something, where somebody from Rome is trying to help Łukasiewicz get out of Poland, and so they're saying, okay, you should. There's some financial help for you, and so on. And the interesting bit is that it says Warsaw, Germania. So okay, so this not, and so this probably it's addressed to Łukasiewicz, but it says care of Lejewski, which probably suggests that either Lejewski was hosting Łukasiewicz for a while, or just receiving his correspondence in London. Some off-prints. Okay, so this is a photo I found apparently somewhere there. There is Łukasiewicz, so you might be able to tell. Okay, what we have here. Oh, that's this is Łukasiewicz was fighting for this. This is he wanted to get a copy of it. This is the contents of his farewell lecture in 1918. When he was becoming a minister, and so he wanted to have this in his archive, and there's some letter exchange saying, okay, I don't have it, and it's very important for me, so it might be quite interesting for you to know as well. That is to Łukasiewicz and written by Abraham Robinson. Now we have again Słupecki explaining some technical matters. Okay, we won't see this. Słupecki again talking about a professor from the Catholic University in Lublin, who shall remain unnamed, I think. That he's trying to build the logic of norms, which is analogous to the three-valued logic, model logic, and Słupecki comments that the work is very weak from the formal point of view, but it has some interesting insights. So you might be able to figure out who that person was.
Kalinowski.
Okay. And yeah, okay, let's go on. So now this is kind of private but interesting, so I thought I'll share with you. So Słupecki's wife is looking for help because their daughter is fallen ill, and there's because there's after war Poland, when probably medical supplies are low, and they're looking for help for her daughter, and they asked Łukasiewicz, and they helped. They sent some medicines to Poland. So yeah, this is Regina Słupecki's Łukasiewicz's wife saying that okay, we'll help you, no problem. And so now Słupecka is thanking for the medicine. Okay, so I don't know, kind of, it's a letter written by Marta Bizoniowa, which is Bizon's wife, and you might be able to tell me who Bizon was. I think he was somebody interested in logic working in Silesia, and he was exchanging some letters with Łukasiewicz, but sadly she's reporting now that he died after getting angry at some some neighbor. So, and she doesn't know what to do with his logical books. So Łukasiewicz is to advise. Okay, so we can skip this, obviously this. Sobocinski, so there's extensive correspondence between Łukasiewicz and Sobocinski. Sobocinski was in the USA at that time. Some manuscript which we have to skip for the sake of time. The manuscript, typescript of Aristotle's Syllogistics, handwritten bits. Oh, that's interesting, kind of. It's Łukasiewicz, probably Łukasiewicz doodles during some boring meeting that he had. Okay, so. Okay, so this is where another interesting story begins. So Łukasiewicz, there's a lot of material relating to this. So Łukasiewicz receives a letter from Wójda, who was at that time translating and compiling Tarski's work in English, asking for permission to publish something, and Łukasiewicz uses this as an opportunity to complain about something, namely the authorship of the notion of many-valued logics, because some authors were wrongfully claiming that Tarski was the author, and Łukasiewicz is quite angry about this, and he's complaining to Wójda, and then he's complaining to other people as well about it, and finally he gets this rectified. But it takes a lot of time in his, a lot of space in his notes. So this is a correction. C.I. Lewis was asked to correct his wrongfully made statements about this. For example, that's okay. We can skip this. And another person that was asked to correct his opinion and statements was G.E. Moore, who also said that Tarski was the author of the notion of many-valued logics. And he, in the meantime, Moore begins to doubt himself about other things. That he says, well, there's a thing. Confronting at my notes that I have been unjust with Wittgenstein. So he's having a doubt about many things at this point. So this is the beginning of the letter. Okay, so we need to skip this. So again, some notes in Polish notation, some probably many-valued tables. This is Oskar Halecki trying to help Łukasiewicz to get out of Poland. It says 1945. I think it says that they're trying to find him a place in the United States. So this is again, I think this is OH, which is Halecki as well. But this time he writes a letter in English to Łukasiewicz. So again, Wójda with corrections. Okay, didn't work. G.E. Moore. So G.E. Moore, he sent him a handwritten letter, and now it's typed. So it shows perhaps it was typed on Łukasiewicz's request. So it might show how important it was. A separate folder for this sort of corrections. So it shows how important this was to Łukasiewicz. Okay, some manuscript. So this is more. So we can skip this. Again, more. So you can see it's a lot of that. So this is, I think, this confirms that Łukasiewicz is happy about getting a copy of the farewell lecture. So it also shows that it was important to him. Some typescripts. Okay, so we can, unfortunately, some of this did not work well. Okay, this is kind of interesting. So this, it says in 1930, so it seems that the University of Warsaw, which was renamed the Józef Piłsudski University, had its own stationery when it comes to seminars, which is a tradition we should come back to perhaps. But this is, I assume, original notes by Łukasiewicz from that time. It says, yeah, it says December 1940 there. Some copies of logical works, offprints of one of the latest works by Łukasiewicz in the Journal of Computing Systems. So all of that. Okay. Something wrong there. So I'm just skipping through. Okay. So that's something in French. Okay, it doesn't work. So let's move. I think that's Scholz writing about Łukasiewicz. Okay. Oh, this is, there were some copies of Christian journal We Go, Idziemy, that Łukasiewicz kept. This might be of interest to people trying to connect Łukasiewicz with Hegel. That's the Hegelian conception of truth by Faris. Okay, so we have to skip through. Oh, this is also interesting. So these are notes by Łukasiewicz, I assume, on Buddhism and logic. So there are some. There's not too many of these, but there was some showing that he had broader interests, and some pictures of famous people related to logic. A lot of Peirce, Charles Peirce, at the age of 20, again Peirce, and this, which will not load, is Peirce's father as well. Okay, this, and then it's not interesting. Some lectures. So we have to unfortunately skip through most of it. Oh, this is also interesting because now he's Łukasiewicz in 1954. He's been invited to deliver a lecture at the centenary of Bohr's laws of thought, but he's declining sadly because of health reasons. Okay, so this is. Okay, so it's a pity that it's not showing here, but this is Łukasiewicz's CV. So in English, so he's describing his life story, how it came to be that he is in Dublin, what happens, and
It was published.
was it published? Okay. So there's a list of publications, but now it's a similar thing, but written in 1940, and it's written in German. I don't read German, but Ian, who was there with me for a while as well, can read, and he told me that actually, because I feel Łukasiewicz was trying to escape or try to survive in a sense during the occupation, and so he was probably asked about his views on the political situation. And he's saying in that I don't really know. I'm just a philosopher. I'm not interested in politics, and just nicely walking around the issues. So this is the German version. Okay, so we not show. Okay. This is also interesting. So. This is written 1953, and initially I wanted to read it to you in larger bits, but I don't have enough time. So this is Łukasiewicz complaining about Dublin, that he's mistreated there, he wants to get out of there, but he needs to sort things out first, and he's looking for places in Oxford and some other places perhaps. but he's really complaining about Ireland at this time. So that was 1953. Okay. Let's go. So that's just some press cuttings found there about Łukasiewicz. So this is Łukasiewicz receiving a honorary doctorate from Munich. Okay, and this is something that is okay. So there's some. I'll come back to this if time permits. That was something very interesting. That's Czerzowski, I think, writing from Poland. Yes. Okay, this is not showing. That's. They talk about roles. On this is something that was very interesting to me. So if you might recognize this instantly by this quote in Greek. So this is in fact taken from Łukasiewicz's 1910 book on the principle of contradiction, and this is handwritten by Łukasiewicz, his own translation into English of this work, and I think it might be claimed that this is the last work that he did before his death, because it's there are some dates there, and it's 1955, so probably the last thing. So that's speeding up. So Rudolf Carnap trying to help Łukasiewicz getting to the US, but saying that Łukasiewicz is quite elderly now and the US system will not permit him to stay there, probably will not find a place. Okay, skipping Brouwer. This is an invitation for him to go to Manchester to lecture as well. There was a professor called Newman, which is also spelled Neumann. And the reason being that his family emigrated from, I think, for what is now Ukraine, and moved to the United Kingdom. That's interesting because this is Oxford, and it says Clarendon Press with German sign for SS. So I don't really know what's happening there. That's Arthur and Pryor. There's some correspondence between them as well. Karl Popper, because they were talking about Lejewski's PhD. And agreeing on the terms. So Popper, this is Łukasiewicz somewhere there as well. Okay, so that's it for the documents. I also have, but it will be quite time-consuming to set it up. I have a fully prepared version of a PDF file with Łukasiewicz's translation of on the principle of contradiction, which runs to about 2/3 of the original book. So, and I've heard that it was the rest of it possibly was translated by Owen LeBlanc. So I'd like to sort of compile the two versions to see if we can have a full version in the end. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this report from Manchester. Before I will start the discussion, we've got something like 5 minutes for discussion. I would like to stress that the research over Łukasiewicz is still in progress, and that's the newest result of this research. That is the book, The Concept of Causality in the Lvov-Warsaw School, in which there is the first translation of Łukasiewicz paper on the concept of cause. It's really new, so even Professor Tkaczyk, who is co-author, didn't see this book so far. So I will just show you this book. And now let me open the discussion about the content of Łukasiewicz Nachlass. Professor Woleński.
I think it will be very important to order this correspondence, mostly correspondence, because it provides many, I think, maybe not quite correct, but information or comments about social history of logic in Poland. For example, Lewowski sent me these letters concerning priority of Łukasiewicz over Tarski. As far as I remember, the problem was not that Tarski was the author, but rather that they were called Tarski-Łukasiewicz logic. And what is interesting, that according to, on the basis of this letter, it is clear that famous footnote in Tarski's Logic of Semantics Mathematics explaining this problem was written by Łukasiewicz, not by Tarski. It is not noted that Tarski was the author of this footnote. Some historians say, okay, Tarski explained himself. Not true, because Woodger had some reservations in order to correct. He formulated some footnotes. Łukasiewicz didn't agree, and finally he wrote himself. I described this story in a paper. It was a story on one footnote. You can find eventually you details. I think that there are many other similar, quite interesting stories about, for example, anyways, I'd like to
We can discuss later.
the time, so anyway.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Zuzana and then Wyszyński.
Thank you very much for the area.
It's very important that this project is realized. Well, our speaker can find many informations on the history of this Nachlass in diaries of Łukasiewicz, well, which was published by me and my younger colleague. And well, I have many remarks on your exposition, and I give the expression of it in correspondence, I think. But I think there is an occasion to say that in the end of November of this year, Łukasiewicz's corpse will be exhumed from Dublin Cemetery and transported to Lvov-Warsaw Cemetery in Warsaw. So to speak, there are two ways of well, assimilating Łukasiewicz in physical. This is allusion to your introduction of your paper, and in Nachlass part. So thank you very much. This is very good and useful work.
Thank you.
Okay, then last question.
Thank you. As I said, thank you very much for your talk, and I look forward to it when I saw it in the program, because I was for a while interested in this archive of Łukasiewicz. I would like to ask you, you mentioned correspondence mainly, and I'd like to ask you if there are some unpublished papers. If you saw something which was prepared by Łukasiewicz instead of this, of this book, or if there are some papers that were not published, it could be.
I don't think so.
So this is just correspondence and some translations.
Yeah, and mainly different versions of papers that were already published. Maybe there is something in there, but for the most part, it's Łukasiewicz's handwritten version, then typed version, and then perhaps an off-print of the published thing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you once again. And our last talk in this session is the paper by Witold PŁOTKA from Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw. The title of this lecture is The Method of Descriptive Psychology in Twardowski's Text and Lectures in 1890s and early 90s. Perhaps a short explanation why a paper about descriptive psychology is located in logical session. Well, there are some pragmatic reasons for that, but mostly descriptive logic was considered in Brentano's tradition as a part of descriptive psychology, so everything is justified.
Thank you for this introduction, and thank you for organizing this excellent event. I really enjoyed the papers. Thank you for invitation. I'm really glad to be here. Short introduction. According to Maria van der Schaar, I quote, Brentano's program forms the background of Twardowski's early writings, end of quotation. Indeed, in the Viennese period when Twardowski worked on his doctoral dissertation, later on the habilitation thesis, or in his first publications written in Polish after his move to Lvov, he referred to various ideas discussed by his teacher. The main task of my paper is to pinpoint topics discussed by Twardowski in his early writings, which adopt the Brentanian framework. I focus on the descriptive psychological issues, mainly on the topic of the method. And against this background, I attempt to examine his early account of descriptive psychology. One may ask to what extent Twardowski's early philosophy can be regarded as rooted in Brentano's method. To address this question, in my paper, in section 1, I will focus on Twardowski's Viennese years. Next, in section 2, I examine Twardowski's view on psychology in relation to other scientific disciplines. Of course, on the basis of papers and lectures given already in Lvov. I'm going to the first section. In his early texts written during his stay in Vienna, Twardowski deals with a Brentanian notion of presentation, which is apprehended by him as a basic mental phenomenon, whose function consists in intending an object. The account from his habilitation thesis of the content and object of presentation is widely discussed in the scholarly literature. Yet, the background of this early account of presentations can be traced back in Twardowski's doctoral dissertation on Descartes, idea and perception and epistemological study of Descartes. During his studies in Vienna, Twardowski participated in Brentano's seminar on Descartes, organized in 1888-89, and there are notes of Brentano handwritten from this seminar, not yet published. And let me start with emphasizing, with summarizing also Brentano's view on Descartes. For Brentano, Descartes was an adherent of the three-class taxonomy of mental phenomena, including presentations, Descartes' idee, judgments, judica in Descartes, and feelings. Of course, this idea mirrors Brentano's own tripartite division of mental phenomena. More importantly, Brentano, following Descartes, identifies two basic forms of knowledge, ideas and perception, whereas the former are simple presentations, latter are founded upon presentations. Yet, this clear division is blurred by Brentano. In the Origin of the Knowledge of Right and Wrong, published only a few years later after Brentano held this seminar on Descartes, he blurs the division. since in his notes, which are devoted to the question of self-evidence and judgment, respectively, he remarks that perception is a form of presentation. Thus, the question arises, should one understand Descartes' ideas and perception as a unified class of presentations or not? This is one of the central questions addressed by Twardowski in his dissertation. In this book, Twardowski interprets Descartes' philosophy from a descriptive psychological point of view. According to Twardowski, Descartes famously defined criterion of truth as clear and distinct perception, but at the same time, he referred to clear and distinct ideas, which seem to suggest that both types of knowledge, it is perception and ideas, are different. By contrast, in Brentano's writings, as already mentioned, one finds a suggestion that both forms of knowledge are identical. Given these differences, Twardowski's main task is to determine whether perception and ideas have something in common, or rather they present two irreducible types of knowledge. To do this, Twardowski first introduces an important distinction, namely a sentence and a judgment. Later, he will refer to the same distinction during his lectures on logic. Next, he held that a sentence is a linguistic object correlated with a judgment on the side of the psyche. Thus understood judgment is a psychic phenomenon. Both phenomena refer to a clear and distinct perception. So it is impossible, according to Twardowski, to identify a judgment with perception itself. Whereas judgment can be true or false, perception cannot be true nor false. In this very context, Twardowski notices that an idea should be understood as a presentation. It is as the content of what is represented in an act. All in all, Twardowski states that perception is not the same as ideas, and that it is irreducible to a mere presentation. Thus, the clear and distinct Cartesian criterion of truth also has to be differentiated as follows. Whereas distinctness concerns both ideas and perception, clearness holds for perception only. Ideas can be at least adequate. For the most part, the relation between perception and ideas is intentional, and they are not identical. In the end, it is important to emphasize that the problem of how to understand presentations was bound with Twardowski's philosophy from his earliest writings. This topic was discussed by Twardowski also in his 1894 lectures on logic given in German in Vienna. As Betty and Respa suggest, in these lectures, Twardowski followed in the footsteps of his teacher from Vienna, comprehending logic as a practical discipline which helps one to operate with psychological judgments. Moreover, Twardowski discussed here Brentano's views on mental phenomena, especially on presentations, in relation to judgments. Let me shortly discuss the second point, it is the topic of presentations. In section 7 of part 1, chapter 1 of the course, Twardowski introduces judgments in relation to presentations. By a presentation, are understood these phenomena in which something appears. To illustrate this, Twardowski formulates some examples that show experiences as based on presentations. If one sees a color, so one presents to oneself or if one imagines something, one presents to oneself an imagined object, and so on. In general, this idea seems to mirror Brentano's thesis that mental phenomena are presentations or are based upon presentations. For Twardowski, it is clear that presentations are necessary for judging, just like for willing, but the question arises whether judgments form a different class of mental phenomena than presentations. Brentano, as it is well known, indeed classified judgments and presentations as different groups of mental phenomena, and he drew a sharp division between both classes. Twardowski seems to agree with Brentano, since he rejects the idea that a judgment is just a combination of presentations, and he claims that judgment is either acceptance or rejection of a certain object. Judgments are therefore described by Twardowski as an intentional relation with an object. In short, judgments are not built of presentations, but anyway, if one wishes to formulate judgments on a certain object, one has to present the object to oneself first. Against this background, Twardowski identifies three parts of every judgment: acceptance or rejection, content, and an object, whereas an object is understood in a broad sense as a thing, a property, a relation, etc. Twardowski's detailed results are unimportant in the context of my paper, but the point of his analysis is clear. Judgments are analyzed as a class of mental phenomena different than presentations. I'm going to section 2, where I focus on the Lvov period of Twardowski's work. So, in 1895, Twardowski moved to Lvov, where he became professor at Lvov University. On November 15, he gave the opening lecture in which philosophy is comprehended as a science, I use Twardowski's own words, just like any other. In this lecture, one finds an attempt to define philosophy on the basis of its subject matter. This idea follows from Brentano's division of sciences as natural and non-natural, that is, philosophical sciences. And so for Twardowski, natural sciences examine, and I quote, things and phenomena which belong to nature, while philosophical sciences focus on mental and spiritual phenomena, end of quotation. The difference then lies in the subject matter, whereas the former sciences, natural, examine natural phenomena, the latter sciences explore mental phenomena. Of course, the subject matter requires a specific method. This view is clearly stated in the essay on psychology versus physiology and philosophy, in which Twardowski writes that, and I quote, psychology supplies philosophy not only with its method, but also with its subject matter, end of quotation. For him, logical rules of thinking, epistemological principles of cognition, or ethical maxims are instantiated in the relevant mental phenomena, which in turn are explored by psychology. In this sense, psychology supplies philosophy with its subject matter. But one may ask, how does psychology supplies philosophy with its method? To address this question, let me remind that for Brentano, the true method of philosophy is none other, nicht anders, as it is well known for habilitation thesis, is none other than that of the natural sciences. In this regard, it can be argued that Twardowski was inspired by his Vienna teacher in comprehending philosophy and thus psychology as using the methods of natural sciences. Already in the opening lecture, Twardowski suggested that psychology may use both deductive and inductive methods. Moreover, psychology proceeds as an analytical and descriptive discipline. To understand these clarifications of Twardowski, it is instructive to refer to his book published in Polish in 1901, The Main Concepts of Didactics and Logic. This book is a textbook for teacher and pedagogy students, but it contains a few important remarks on the method. To begin with, if a procedure decomposes an object, it is analytical because it identifies separate features of this very object. This procedure is performed in a way of abstraction, which in general consists in a presentation of the relevant features as something separate. Next, a procedure is descriptive if it aims to achieve, and I quote Twardowski, to achieve an enumeration of perceivable parts and perceivable features of an object, which is intuitively given in Polish, które sobie wyobrażam. End of quotation. A description is all the more exact if it concerns a high number of parts and features. In this context, Twardowski adds that describing is different than defining, since description is limited to perceivable parts or features, and the object of this description, different than the object of definition, has to be intuitively given. In a sense, it has to be given in intuition, in Polish wyobrażone. Both analysis and description are not methods in a strict sense, because by a method, Twardowski understands a systematic examination which is held on the basis of planned procedure. The method of sciences, and thus psychology and philosophy, is inductive and deductive. In his 1901 book, Twardowski divides this method into 4 phases. 1, description; 2, constructing a hypothesis; 3, reasoning, including deduction; and 4, verification of the hypothesis. And so, Twardowski emphasizes that description follows analysis, and this is called observation by him. Here, he also mentions experiments understood as procedures which are constructed within research. On the basis of observed and described phenomena, one inductively collects them in order to formulate a probable conclusion. In this context, Twardowski draws a difference between 2 terms. The term law refers to any statement which states a rigid connection between some phenomena, and the term hypothesis refers to any statement which states a probable connection between some phenomena. Next, one considers a hypothesis and as a result deduces its possible consequences. To phrase it differently, this stage consists in listing the possible consequences if the hypothesis is regarded as a reason for them. Finally, one compares the listed consequences with reality, as Twardowski writes, and I quote, "The more the number of consequences of a hypothesis is consistent with reality, the more probable it is." End of quotation. In conclusion, he states that description in this procedure is based on experience, and for this reason, sciences which adopt this method are called empirical, including psychology. Twardowski includes some clarifications on the method of sciences in the course on the method of scientific research, which was given for the first time in 1898 and later repeated in 1902 and 1906. In this course, Twardowski used two terms interchangeably: the term empirical sciences and the term inductive sciences. Generally, science is based on facts. He does not use anymore so frequently the Brentanian term phenomena in this regard. He prefers to write about facts. So science is based on facts which are followed by experience, observation, and experiments. In order to define observation, Twardowski follows John Stuart Mill in claiming that observation consists in perceiving an object as being composed of its parts. Next, he comments on Bacon's idola theory in order to define some rules of efficient observation. As a result, he holds that observation should not add anything to or exclude something from observed phenomena. Moreover, it should be exact and it has to be done methodically. Importantly, observation can be supported by experiments which evoke relevant phenomena. Twardowski writes that, and I quote, "Passive observation cognizes phenomena when and how they arise in the flow of events. An experimenter himself creates phenomena when they are necessary for him." End of quotation. On the basis of these general remarks, Twardowski describes the inductive method just as it was discussed in his 1901 book. For example, he considers the question of how one inductively collects and compares observed phenomena. He examines specific methods of empirical research, and he discusses logical structures of inductive reasoning. For Twardowski, the parallel between natural and philosophical sciences concerns the method, but they still have a different object. We have to keep this in mind. While natural sciences explore natural phenomena and are based on external experience, philosophical sciences, including psychology, examine mental phenomena and are based on internal experience. Wyszyński, so one of the first psychologically oriented students of Twardowski, noticed that for Twardowski, psychology was experimental in the sense of describing and analyzing internal experiences instead of statistics of physiological reactions. In any case, these experimental claims of philosophy and thus psychology make them sciences, to quote Twardowski once again, just like any other. In conclusion, of course, in order to describe Twardowski's account of the method of descriptive psychology, one should include also other important texts. For example, Twardowski's habilitation thesis, the essay on psychology and physiology, not to mention the text on imaginaries and concepts. Because of time, I will not discuss this text here, especially given that they are rather well discussed in the scholarly literature. Instead, in my paper, I focus on less known texts of Twardowski to show main points of how he deduced the method of descriptive psychology. To sum up, for him, the method serves to describe mental phenomena, formulating laws of the mental, and designing experiments. All these features show for Twardowski that the method of psychology makes this discipline a sort of science to repeat just like any other. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Witold, for presenting the method of descriptive psychology as it is practiced by Twardowski and also systematized by him. And now let me open the discussion. We've got about 12 minutes for questions and comments. Yes, Professor Rasfak.
I didn't understand if you think that Twardowski's theory of judgment in Vienna is a Brentanian theory, or if insofar he introduces judgments on a relation, he distances himself from Brentano, because these judgments on a relation are not reducible to existential judgment. And their object is also different.
I agree, but the question I considered in the stuff only was the question, the issue of the relationship between judgment and representation in a sense of Brentano, so as a psychological object. And I agree with you that if you go into the details, there are differences. But thank you for this commentary.
Okay. So I think it is interesting to compare Brentano, Twardowski, and Husserl about descriptive psychology. Brentano, I think that he was uncertain whether descriptive psychology is empirical in the same sense as so-called genetic psychology. Husserl contrasted very strongly. So for him, phenomenological psychology was descriptive and completely different than genetic or empirical, empirical of course in his sense. But Twardowski was, in a sense, in between. Yes, we agree that it's not an objection that he was non-consequent or something like that, but he tried to combine both as legitimate empirical science.
You mean genetic and descriptive?
No, genetic and descriptive. Because he used even organized empirical research in Lemberg about the first laboratory psychological.
Thank you for this question. Of course, I agree that Twardowski was not as radical as Brentano in comprehending the relation between descriptive and genetic psychology because of his studies in Würzburg. And he had an occasion to meet directly Wundt but at the time when he was in Würzburg, one didn't lecture on psychology, and he established a close relation with Oskar Kilpe, who lectured at the time on experimental psychology, and he was impressed by the way he translated the text of Kilpe into Polish, and one of the translators was Stanisław Brzozowski. He was involved in the process of translating the text. And I think that because of this influence of Kilpe, probably he did not draw a strict difference between those two approaches, and he tried to combine. I agree with this, but if we, and this research still to do, but if someone wants to track the development of descriptive psychology in Lvov-Warsaw School, I think it was a permanent naturalization, more and more, and it culminates in Kreutz, who was almost completely genetic psychologist and not so much descriptive psychologist. I think so. So in the history of descriptive psychology in the Lvov-Warsaw School, probably this accent put on different methods implied or encouraged people to include also genetic accounts. Thank you for this question.
My question would be about terminology. This presentation is Vorstellung in German, because the title of the work, as I have got the message from you, the lecture is the Inhalt und Gegenstand der Vorstellungen. This was the title in English, the contents and object of presentation. And this was the second terminology problem I had. Even intuitions, because creative Einbildungskraft, Kantian there perhaps, how it was with this tradition of translating intuition, imagination, because Einbildung is involved in wyobraźnia.
Yes.
Whereas there was wyobraźnia here, but you translated it into intuition. Why?
In Polish it's wyobrażenia, and in German it's Anschauungen. And we know that Brentano and Twardowski, after him, was very skeptical about Kantian philosophy. And I would not find those Kantian influences in Twardowski as well. Rather, the direct influence comes from Brentano in this respect. And for Brentano, intuition, Anschauung, is always somehow has this intuitive content. Something is present in our experience, and this idea comes from.
So we inherited this translation to intuition.
Yeah.
From Anschauung.
Yeah.
My question is related to the procedure, scientific procedure presented by Poznan. Was it something genuine at the time, or he rather presented something formally known, but just to be instructive for this lesson?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for this. And my hypothesis so far is that he took over the method of descriptive psychology from Brentano, probably directly from his lectures in which he took part on descriptive psychology, which are different than the early texts on psychology from an empirical point of view. And the tracks one can find in both theories lead to Mill, and here's the system of logic, especially the method of inverse deduction, which can be found in Mill. And Mill uses this method within the context of historical sciences. Brentano uses the same method and refers to the system of logic to explain how we can make a hypothesis about something which is not given, about mental phenomena which are not experienced at the present time, and inductively collect experiences to make general statements. So in general, I think this was a huge debate between Brentano, Comte, and Mill. So within the positivism, and this chapter of the history of philosophy is completely unknown, because in Germany positivism was not so popular, and probably Brentano was one of the few, if not the only one, who commented on Comte and Mill, and he was skeptical about Comte's account, but he was sympathetical with Mill. He tried to establish a letter exchange with Mill, but at the time Mill was, big person, and he wasn't interested in writing letters with Brentano. At the time, he was very young and not very well known. So from a historical point of view, I think it comes directly from Brentano and Mill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
How do you translate Twardowski's expressions przedstawienie naoczne and przedstawienie nienaoczne into English?
Intuitive and non-intuitive presentation. Yeah.
So we definitely reply to your reply, because there is a term and mathematician communication. Descriptive geometry and geometria poglądowa. So geometria opisowa, geometria poglądowa. Więc Anschauung for me would be poglądowa, pogląd, Anschauung. In that translation, traditional translative German works from geometry for engineers. So simplified geometry, not axiomatic or Euclidean sense, but practical. So it will be poglądowa. It is a kind of Anschauung kind of translation rather than.
Yeah, the term Anschauung is ambitious in German, of course, but in technical context we are talking about. So in the Brentanian tradition, Anschauung refers to the element of our cognition, which makes this cognition the cognition of something. So it's the content, the intuitive content, what is present intuitively.
The question was recently asked that Anschauung would mean pogląd or not. So
Yes, but Twardowski does not use this word. It's fortunate that he wrote his text in German and in Polish, so we can track how he did translate his German text.
Many technology coming to Polish from many sides.
Thank you for
Thank you once again for. I only have one short comment and some announcements. My comment is that you probably don't know, Witold, how much logical your paper was. If we look at Łukasiewicz paper on the analysis of the concept of cause, the steps of analysis are just the same as in the descriptive psychology, only he calls his method logical and the objects analyzed are different. Not presentations and so on, but real objects which are analyzed. But the steps, the methods used are really similar. And my announcements are that I would like to take pictures of us outside the Tarski's room. So if you agree, let's do it. And now we have plans to have lunch. Unfortunately, it's not in this building. We have to go to the main university campus. And we have to take everything with us because there is in the break there is something happening here in this room. So just. I will need like 2 minutes to take something from here, and we will go to the main campus to have lunch. Polityka, Instytut Nauk Politycznych. Polityków się nazywa. Okay. And our next session starts at 3 p.m. Thank you very much. And see you.